Hi, and welcome to episode 28 of this ChessTDD series. This time I'm actually recording the audio literally right after coding, so we will see if that helps me remember any better. I'm betting maybe not. What I'm showing you here, I'm zooming in a little bit. This is something that was shown to me, and I talk a little bit about it in the post too. This opened my eyes a whole lot. Darren put this together here in a gist, went and wrote it up in a lot of detail. Go look at it. It's in the blog post. I have the link to it. Basically, this opened my eyes and I said, oh, I didn't realize that there would be a nice way to create something that was quite so visually appealing, I guess, in terms of laying out acceptance tests for a chess game. So I could, literally make an ASCII board and put pieces on it, and those would be the acceptance tests. Like there's, a piece in this row and column and another one here, and I should be able to capture. So, pardon the digression here. This will probably take several episodes as I write something that's capable of taking that sort of ASCII input and creating a board from it. But I feel that this is a completely worthwhile digression as long as I've started down this SpecFlow path, because this is going to allow us to create really compelling acceptance tests where it's like, here, look, this is a chessboard, and if you have, these pieces here and these pieces there, then you have these moves available. I can't think of a better way to make this clear to somebody who knows chess. Like, I could show this to friends who have never programmed but know how to play chess, and they'd say, oh, yeah, I see. I know that your application is working correctly because I'm looking at a chessboard, and I know I should be able to move here. And the best part is I can do that without creating some kind of like web-based or WPF GUI to throw on top of here. So anyway, where I'm picking back up here is I said, okay, if looking at the way that SpecFlow works, there's this table, and the way I'm going to be accessing the table is it's two-dimensional, so row and column specifications, which should look pretty familiar, and then there will be these ASCII designations that we give the piece. I'm going to take Darren's convention here and have maybe the first letter be the color of the piece, and then the second letter or two be the actual name of the piece. So like BQ would be the black queen, WP would be a white pawn. So what I'm going to do is write this class called ASCII Board Builder that's going to go in the production code, and it's going to be a way of building a board object as it's defined in the production code. So it's going to be something that, generally speaking, takes in a row and column and then this ASCII string, and it should be able to take a bunch of these, and when you're finished, you should say generate a board from this, and it will. The idea being that in SpecFlow, I'll iterate over one of these tables, reading the pieces that are or are not there, and then at the end say, all right, generate a board based on this. And then once we've got that generated board, that's what we'll be using in the SpecFlow scenarios to say, okay, if I have this board and I get pieces at this particular place, or get moves at this particular place, then, the following moves should be present or absent. So this is going to be the first one. I'm going to say that the ASCII board builder should generate an empty board, because the implementation that came into my head was we'll have this ASCII board builder. You can add a bunch of ASCII pieces to it, and then at some point you can tell it to generate a board based on what you've added. So this is probably familiar if you've been watching the whole series. I start out just putting the production class right here in line with the test class, because it's easier than flipping back and forth between files. It's going to be faster. So this is just a little hack I've always done over the course of time. It's, it's sooner or later, if you forget to do the right thing, you'll be reminded. Okay, so back to what I'm actually doing here in the test class. I'm starting out driving out functionality of the new ASCII board builder class that I'm creating, but I hit an interesting point where I thought, if I'm going to want to see how many pieces are on the board that I'm generating, I don't really have an easy way of doing that right now. So I'm going to add a property called piece count to the board class. I think that's a reasonable thing to offer up in the production code for collaborators of this. They might want to know. No sense keeping that purely encapsulated, but it leads me into this interesting situation where I'm using TDD and red-green refactor to simultaneously change the functionality of two different classes. There was a time some years back where I would have been opposed to this approach because I really wanted to be focused on isolating one class and not ever testing multiple classes together. Over the years, especially as I've gone towards more of this outside-in approach at times, I've gotten away from that. So developing functionality on these two classes in concert, I consider to be a reasonable enough thing to do. Some people may disagree with that. This certainly adds complexity since I'm going to be changing two different classes at once to get what I want. And you could imagine that this could create a scenario where I make two mistakes that that add up to a temporarily correct set of tests. But I think that's probably an okay risk to take. And if we're really going to run into something bad like that, sooner or later the acceptance tests are going to bomb or some other test will bomb. Or if I discover that, as I'm writing these things, I'll just write a test case that exposes whatever it is that I'm doing wrong. So I consider this an acceptable risk. You may get other people that say not. Certainly, if the complexity of this approach is creating problems for you, simplify it, separate it by all means. This might be a slightly more intermediate TDD technique. So now what's happened is I've gotten about as far as I can doing things the dumb way. And simultaneously, I need to get this add piece thing going, and I need to get the piece count thing working correctly. The way I saw it as I was writing this code, by doing those two things, actually getting it right is the simplest way that I can make this test pass. And the simplest way you can make a test pass, that might be the factor that prevents people from wanting to be changing things in two different classes at once, because changing two different things at once is complex. So I think people making an argument that I'm maybe not always doing the simplest thing here might be right. But anyway, your mileage may vary. I won't harp on that too much longer, especially because I'll give you a spoiler. It turns out all right in the end. So what I'm doing is I am moving this board to be a class level field, and I'm going to add pieces to it as the clients of this API add, as they call add piece. I'm going to have this board that I'm adding pieces to as I go, and when they say generate, I'm just going to return it. So to someone consuming this class, it might seem that I'm just storing pieces and actually generating the board, but that's the beauty of encapsulation and object-oriented programming. It's none of their business how I do this internally. So now what I'm going to do here is update the piece count, because I could probably do some kind of hacky thing where I would get this to pass using complex conditionals, but really, this class is a well-implemented, well-tested class, so if I just basically go in here and get all of the non-null pieces in this two-dimensional piece array, that should get me what I want. So this isn't particularly complex. I'm just kind of exposing a thing that's already implemented in here that I just haven't exposed yet. I do not write a whole lot of C# and I do not do a whole lot of LINQ lately, so I was struggling a bit, kind of going back through my IntelliSense and reminding myself two-dimensional array isn't something I use all the time anyway. Eventually, I paused and went over to Google to remind myself of what might be a good way to go about doing this. Suppose that's a little bit cheating in the spirit of what I'm doing, but I didn't leave out any actual attempts to code this thing. I just left out the part where I went and Googled for 30 seconds or so. I guess I could have brought up the Google window and shown the Stack Overflow post that I found, but oh well. So what I did was use this this cast method on the two-dimensional array to turn this into a collection of pieces, a linear collection of pieces, and then I just counted up the ones that weren't null. So it's not the most intuitive thing. I was thinking there might be some kind of count. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It got the job done. But what I did here next is you're going to see me write another test that I don't expect to go red. I'm writing a test here to confirm that this thing I did with link actually works. And I would recommend this. When you go Google a solution and it says, oh, sure, you can use this sequence of link operations to get what you want, and great, your test goes green, I'd maybe write another test or two to make sure that the internet is correct, so to speak. Call me distrusting, but it's not so much distrusting even the people on the internet, it's distrusting my own understanding of what's going on when I don't come to the solution all out of my own head. So that's something I would definitely recommend doing, is writing an extra test or two when you've gone and looked up a solution. So this is something I fully expect to pass. So I'm adding 2 pieces and then verifying that the generated board does in fact have 2 pieces. So now I'm going to move on. I'm relatively content that what I just did should work now that I've added that extra green test. And it's always, if I expect a test to go red and it goes red, or if I expect it to go green and it goes green, I generally feel a lot better about what I'm doing. One of the benefits of TDD that people don't talk about quite as much is that constant, quick ability to reassure yourself that you understand what the code is doing. I find that very important, that I'm always checking in as I go. Is what's happening, what I expect to happen. So I started writing another test, and then I commented out the first line because I want to go back and do some refactoring. I'm now several tests in, and I've got this redundancy where I'm instantiating the board builder in each of these test methods, so at the very least I can get rid of that. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to use target here to generate the board instead of the newly instantiated board builder. So as you can see, I'm going to take a line out of each one of these tests, and don't remember off the top, this series is going on 9 months now, as I do 1 or 2 posts, or 1 post a week, maybe most for it, but I'm sure you've seen me talk about how I believe it's important to keep your tests as succinct as possible. So it's no surprise that I'm in here once again doing this. Now I'm going to do another thing, and this is perhaps a little bit more controversial. I was debating in my head as I went over whether to do this or not, because it introduces some indirection that's perhaps not clear, but it makes the tests even more terse. So what I'm actually going to do is have this property that I call generated board, and it's going to encapsulate querying the target for the board. So you can see now I can take this target.generated board or generate board out of each one of these tests and just use the generated board property. I think that this eliminates some duplication that I had, and I find it to be relatively understandable. You may actually not find that to be the case, and that's an instance where it's really kind of, I think, a matter of taste. People could certainly argue about the merits of this or not. For me, I actually think overall, on balance, it helps the readability of these tests. If you don't think so, and you've got your own fork of this code base or something going, by all means, get rid of it. It's about making the code readable and clear to as many people as possible. So if I were working with a team of 3 other people and all of them gave me the feedback that they think that this hurts readability, I would probably acquiesce and put it back, even though I like it better. Having it more readable to more people is really the main goal. Okay, so moving on, what I'm going to do now is I'm starting to say, when I'm doing TDD, what I'm doing is kind of trying to drive out the functionality one thing at a time. And so now, great, I've got a board that's being generated. I feel good that it's adding pieces where it's told to add the pieces. The thing that I need to do now is You can't see it at the bottom, but I know that this thing is just hard-coded to add pawns all the time. So the next piece of functionality I want to drive out is I want to say that I'm going to add a bishop. And in retrospect, I'm doing something here that I kind of wish I had gotten away from, which is not only am I saying that I want to add a bishop, I'm saying specifically I want to add a white bishop. You know, you'll do things like this. I think it would have been a little better if I had said, let's add or let's give a color to the pawn and then confirm that it's a white pawn, instead of saying, all right, I'm going to introduce bishop, I'm going to introduce a second piece, and I'm going to introduce this idea of the piece being colored. I do seem to recall that what happened was I realized that all of my piece strings were going to be at least 2 characters, and so the add piece with just P for the string had been an oops, so I didn't want to perpetuate that any further by adding just a B. So there was a method to that madness, but in retrospect, what I probably should have done is added the color designation to the method above with the pawn. But it all worked out in the end, spoiler again. So what I did was say, okay, let's first, use red-green refactor to get this passing by successfully generating a bishop. And you can see I did something fairly obtuse to get that working and said, hey, if I'm passing this WB string in, that's a bishop. So the next thing I'm going to do is I want to say that it's also true that this piece I added because of the W for white is a first player piece. And because that's the default, it does turn out to be true, so mission accomplished. Now I'm going to do something interesting here. I really, really don't like multiple asserts in test methods. Another thing where your mileage may vary, but when I'm coaching people about writing automated tests at the unit level, multiple asserts gets ugly in a hurry, because really what you want is for these tests to be sort of specific and focused, and you really want to be asserting one thing. Sometimes you'll have situations where the one thing you're asserting is kind of 2 things. This is one of those situations, for instance, but I don't see too many cases where you can't do something like what I'm doing here, where I'm going to express what it means to be a white bishop and then assert that white bishop is the case. I don't need to do assert twice. I can figure out what white bishopness is and then assert that that's the case. And so what will happen is this test is going to fail if is white bishop isn't true. That's really what I want, rather than guessing, maybe which of these specific asserts failed. Now, you might get somebody that comes in and offers up the counter argument that, hey, if I have 2 asserts, I can see whether white is failing or whether bishop is failing. That's a fair argument. I think it's another one of those things that's a mix of judgment call and personal taste. For me, I'd rather just know if this whole thing is passing or failing. If I want granularity like that, I'd rather just write another test. Is white or is bishop? Okay, so moving on. Now what I decided to do is say, I know that P up there is wrong, as I mentioned before, so I'm going to write a test that bombs out if you pass in P, because I know it shouldn't. And that's going to force me, once I made that test pass, now I have to go and change these methods I had created earlier not to use the plain P, which I did. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this throw exception when color is not specified method in there, because that's something that should be true and something that we should check for. I don't want to allow that to creep back in the future. So now I have no implementation in reality of player 2 of the black player, because I've just been relying on the default to get the white pieces going, because the default is first player piece because of implementations I made earlier. Little correction there too I made with the test method name, I noticed after the fact. So I'm going to say let's add a piece to 1-3, and the string will be BB for black bishop, and then I'm going to get this piece that's been added from the generated board, and I'm going to follow the same pattern that I did in the test method above here, where I'm going to say, let's assert that this is a type of bishop, but now we're going to say that it's not a first player piece, because that's what it means to be the black bishop. So I'm going to assert that this is a black bishop, which we know is going to fail because I'm not capturing at all the idea of first or second player piece. So now I'm kind of looking at this method, which is starting to look pretty goofy. This clearly needs some refactoring. So what's the easiest way I can capture this? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this piece string that's getting passed in. And I'm going to reason that if the first character is W, then it is a first player piece. Otherwise, it's not. Now, there's going to be a test that needs to be written here at some point later, I'm guessing, where I pass in some other character other than W or B. Because the check I have above where I'm throwing an exception just tests that the whole string is P, but what if I pass in P, P? That would work right now, and it would just consider that to be a first player piece, or I'm sorry, a second player piece. But that's a problem to be solved later. And now I'm remembering what that API is, where I can pass in this optional is first player piece parameter to the constructor. It's not settable. So I am now passing that in, and what I was expecting is for everything to work. What I wasn't accounting for was that hard-coded bit of if the piece is equal to WB specifically. So what I really want there is to know if the, rather than the color string, the actual like piece string is B. But I forgot what I had hard-coded in there, and here's, a big visible win for test-driven development. I had hard-coded something bad in there and forgotten all about it, and now I'm discovering it a couple of tests later, rather than after hours of programming when I actually have some GUI fired up and I can't for the life of me figure out why all my pieces are white or something. The quicker the time between making a mistake and figuring it out, typically the less time you're going to spend trying to figure out what the mistake was. So I believe it took me just one round with the debugger here to realize what the problem was. I'm going to step over. If you wonder why I don't hit F10, it's because F10 stops the recording in Camtasia. That's been a source of a lot of annoyance for me over the course of time. So, oh, I see what happened. It didn't actually go into this thing to set the piece to add to a bishop. And then I realized, right, hard-coded. So I'm going to go up and, I'm going to test for bishop that the character at index 1 is B, and then it passes, because that's really what I wanted to do. Now, I'm getting pretty long into this recording. It went on to about 27 or 28 minutes here, which I think it might be my longest one, but I wanted to leave it a sort of a good wrap-up point. This is a little awkward. So I'm going to write another test here, and I'm actually going to look to drive towards refactoring a little bit. So kind of what I'm thinking when I write this test is, so I'm handling pawn, which was the default, and then I added an if condition to handle bishop so that I was handling both. If I had a third, I'm going to add queen in here, and I'm not even going to worry too much about asserting things about the color here. I just want to have a situation where, so a third piece is going to kind of force me to the factory type implementation of the case statement that you might expect to see for something like this, where I'll have a switch over the actual string of the piece, and then I'll generate one of these polymorphic piece types based on that. So I want to get to that point here. And for the record, that's about the only time you'll ever see me using switches. I never, ever use them for behavior, but to me, the use case for that is you're getting in some token of sorts that determines what sort of polymorphic thing you need to generate. It's about the only time you'll ever see me using case statements. So I am down here now. I'm going to say, okay, to me, the simplest thing here is to create this method and then invoke it. That method add piece is a mess. So I'm going to distill down to the actual piece creation something here where I'm going to pass in a character. And also this is first player Boolean because that's necessary at the creation time of these piece instances. Otherwise I would forget about it. So I want to, excuse me, I should say a string. And the reason I'm leaving it as a string is because of the fact that king and knight both start with K, so you're going to see that abbreviated like K and KN, I think is the convention in the chess world. So what I'm going to do is switch over this P string, and I'm going to say, all right, let's clean this up and do it right. So we're going to have this case that's P, and when the case is P, we're going to return a new pawn. And then, and you can see that's why I need to pass in the first player piece Boolean. I suppose I could implement that as a property or something, but I don't really consider this onerous. So for B, we're going to return a bishop, and we're going to also pass in his first player piece. And now to make our new test pass, the one that's actually red, we're going to have this queen case, and we're going to return a queen. At least we are once I put in the colon. And then I think this is probably going to get upset if I don't specify some default. I don't care much what it is right now. I just want to stave off any compiler complaining. I forget. Too long away from the code. So now I start to flounder around. Even just in the short term, naming things badly tends to create confusion. I should have, the moment I figured out that I didn't like the naming for that method add piece, I should have changed it rather than thinking, oh, I'll fix this later. Because now I'm confusing it with the fact that add piece is the name of the method I'm in, and it's also the name of the method on board. And I'm also not adding a piece at all in that method. So anyway, I doubled down a little here, but eventually kind of got it straightened out. What I really want to be doing is actually building the piece and then adding the piece that I've built to the board. So I introduced a local and say, oh, okay, well, here's the piece to add to the board. And then I was having trouble like, hey, why can't I add the piece to the board with add piece? I forgot that it also needed a coordinate. So I just deleted all that stuff. And this looks a little better. So now I'm sick of the naming problem here. So one of the first things, or the first thing I'm going to do is let's give this a good name. We'll call this build piece. So the piece to add is the result of build piece. And this looks a lot more compact. I think at this point I opted to wrap up, even though I kind of wanted to get a little less obtuse about the exception throwing. I'll do that next time around. So on the next episode, I will finish this class, hopefully. We'll see how long that takes. And once that's finished, we can start driving at the real thing to do here, which is to get back into those features in SpecFlow and add some really nice looking stuff. So I'm just going to check this, or commit this and then push it up to the master so you can grab this code as you like. And thanks for watching. I'll see you next time around when we finish this ASCII class.